Can you tell me your name, please?
Robert Hope.
Robert Hope. And can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
As was mentioned earlier, along the west end of Newcastle. Started work in 1959 for the National Coal Board. Moved to Washington Development Corporation in 1965. And I was there until wind up of the corporation, which was in 1988. We were taken over by the Commission for the New Towns, and that lasted about 3 years. And then inevitably made redundant. But I wasn't out of a job for long. I got employment at the Child Benefit Centre at Washington. A job I didn't particularly like, but it served its purpose. It got me to the near a retiring age. I was able to retire early with the pension I had. So I was quite fortunate in that respect. I've watched Washington grow from a mining community into what it is today. And it's quite interesting to think of what the place was like when we first came to live here. And over the years it's developed. I think, though I might be biased, but I think they did a good job. The Development Corporation, they achieved what they set out to do, create little individual villages, gave them an identity, segregated pedestrians from traffic, though that's eroded quite a bit over the years. The initial sort of idea was that pedestrians were totally isolated from main traffic, but you'd see little inroads where there's footpaths in places that the corporation would possibly never have put them. Created a lot of underpasses, bus-only links, which were quite controversial in their day. Meant that vehicles had to sort of do a detour, whereas if they could see where they wanted to be, they had to go for miles around. And in terms of enjoyment living here, I think we've been quite happy to live in Washington. I certainly enjoyed my time at the Development Corporation, and I don't think I've heard of anyone that worked there had any sort of misgivings about the place at all. It was a lovely, friendly atmosphere, and very fortunate.
That's great. Now, you were telling me a little bit before we started recording about how you ended up being employed by the Development Corporation, and I found that whole sort of process really interesting.
Yeah,
if you
well,
could tell me a bit about that.
As I say, I started working in Milburn House at Newcastle, and I was just a tea boy at the time. That was my first job, sort of brewing tea and going around distributing papers and things like that. And then I got a job in the agenda section, doing committee work, and that's where I met this chap called Ken Armstrong, who was a committee clerk. They used to go to take the board minutes and this sort of thing. And he left. The coal board was a sort of its death throes. He left and got fixed up at the Development Corporation as the admin officer there. And he rang me up one day and he said, would you be interested in coming to Washington to work? And I said, well, yeah. It was a lifeline, really. And I came, and the interview I had, I remember I'd never been to Washington. I didn't drive then at the time, so it was a bus journey from Warwick Street, 39 buses it was then. I didn't know Washington at all, but I got off at what's now Concord, but they called that New Washington. That's what they called that area, New Washington, as opposed to the village down at the bottom of the bank. And then I walked back along what's Heworth Road till I got to the top of the Coast Road, and in those days the Coach Road ran right down to Usworth Hall. And it was a sort of a hedgerow on either side, most of that still survives, and that's where I walk the dog now. So I walked down there to Usworth Hall, and the interview was due to about 4 o'clock. I got there in good time, I remember. I got there about 3. The place was deserted. There was nobody about. Lights blazing, but nobody around, and I can't remember who it was made me a cup of tea or something, and I waited and I waited and I waited, and at about 6 o'clock, Mr. Holly, who I didn't know then, and his finance officer, a chap called Leonard Marshall, came bustling into the room, apologised for the delay, and they hurried me upstairs into Mr. Holly's office, and we sat talking, and they just asked us where I'd worked and this, but they knew that already from what Ken Armstrong had told them. But they spent the whole of the time apologising for the fact that they'd kept me waiting, you know. And when I came out of the room, by this time it was getting quite late. And Mr. Armstrong, Kenneth, he had a little pokey little office. It was a temporary arrangement at the back of the Usworth Hall. And I popped my head in and he said, well, how did it go, blah, 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 and I had a bit of crack with him. And then I came home, West End of Newcastle, waited, and I got a letter saying I'd got the job. And I started there, I think it must have been in November, middle of November.
So was that, what year was that?
That was 65.
65.
Yes. And the place, everything was smelled of new paint, because they'd refurbished the whole office, and it was quite basic. There was hardly any furniture there at all, just the basic things. And the caretaker, Mrs. Wilkinson, Etty, as she was fondly remembered as, she had a flat within the hall itself, and she'd worked for the NCB and had kept her on with the building. And she was quite a character, was Etty, and she looked after us. She called us her bairns. She used to brew up for us and make us cups of tea. There was no canteen facilities then. You brought your own lunches, packed lunches. You could heat things up on a. She had a room adjacent to her flat, which had a sort of an auger cooker, which she kept stoked up. So we could heat things up, if you know, booked soup and things like that. And then, after an interval, by this time I think the staff would be about maybe 20, 30 people. We got permission to use the pit canteen at Usworth Colliery, which was just a 5-minute walk down the road, and that was great, you know. And the other source of nutrient was Lottie's Fish Shop on Heworth Road. We used to go to Lottie's for a fish and chips on a Friday. And it was a very homely atmosphere. And everybody was in the same boat, because we'd all sort of come from different places, but we're sort of gelled. And all different professions over the years, you know, architects, planners, engineers, and it worked very well. And we had a good social life as well. We had pot pie nights, barbecues.
And bonfire night. Bonfire night.
Bonfire nights, yes, things like that. So it was really, really good. And as I say, I've never heard anyone complain about their time working at the Development Corporation. And as in that thing I've given you there, I reckon I was the longest serving employee of the Development Corporation. I wasn't the very first to start, and I wasn't the very last to leave, but I was one of the last to leave, and I was one of the first to start, and people had come and gone in the meantime, you know. But it was a sense of purpose, you know. We went, as I said, I started off in the admin section. I then went and worked in the civil engineers department as a technical clerk, and that was great because I got out onto sites. Used to go out with the site engineers when they were doing meeting with the clerk of works and the contractors, discussing the progress of the works and this sort of thing. And he'd go to the side cabin and have a cup of tea and listen to the crack, take notes, then write them up, and then. So I went all the developments around, you know, Barmston, Glebe, Sulgrave. Attended all those side cabins and just literally saw the town being built.
Amazing.
And then with being in the engineers, I saw all the highway plans. The lads, I can see them now at the drawing boards, you know, working on drafts, tracers and doing the plans and everything. But they worked with the Highways Authority, Durham County Council as it then was. They coordinated the road structure with the general area, so it linked up with the A1, the Tyne Tunnel link. It was all sort of planned. And the master plan, this thing here, spells it out really. They didn't depart from that. It's basically as you see it on there. I don't know if you've seen that.
I've only seen the cover, so this
Right,
is
well-
quite interesting.
Well, you can take that away with you if you
Are
want.
you sure?
Yeah. And I'll tell you a tale about that. We collected them from Newcastle Central Station. And I remember burning my hand on the radiators underneath the central station. Is it's a labyrinth of
Wow.
cellars and that. And these were sent up by the consultants, Llewellyn Davies Wicks, from London. And we picked them up they were taken off the train and put down into the bowels of the central station, and we had to go down there and collect them. And as I say, I put my hand on the radiator and it really burnt my hand. Scotty hot they were. So that was a bit of an exciting.
Yeah. So
But the way it developed really was that they put the infrastructure in first, you know, just main drainage, stuff below ground before they ever put anything on the top. And they had what they called a thrust bore. Remember going down to it's near where Newall's the chemical works were. There was a railway track along there, and they put what they called a thrust bore underneath the railway because the railway was still running then, operating. And it was a huge concrete, it's about the height of this room. You could walk, you didn't have to stoop, you could walk through it. And it, as the name suggested, the thrust, the pipework literally pushed it through
wow.
to the other side. And of course that linked up with the sewage works at Barmston. And that was an experience going down there, I'll tell you. Because I used to take notes down there as well. Oh, it wasn't a pleasant place to work, I tell you.
Oh, I bet.
And happy days.
So did you have to wear masks and things?
No, there was. I remember they had these. They called them euphemistically referred to as lagoons. And I'm not going into detail, but the lagoons were about the height of that mantelpiece. So they came up to there, and you walked
Chest
in
height,
between
yeah.
these lagoons, and all this effluent and stuff was floating on the top. And would you believe they had a little dinghy?
Oh.
Can you imagine? They had a dinghy. And then you'd go to the side cabin. They had an office. It was a prefabricated thing. A fellow called Dave Pollington was a sewage man, and he had two fellas that worked with him. He'd say, "Do you want a cup of tea, Bob?" You know, no. And I didn't drive then, so I had to wait until somebody picked me up and take me back to Ellsworth Hall.
Yes, I suppose if you worked there, you just had to drink your tea and coffee and have your dinner there.
Yeah, they didn't think anything of it. And it always surprised me that they built houses down there. what did it call the park? Something Park. Peel Park, was it? They actually built houses, and I mean, if the wind was in the right direction, it wasn't. Never mind. It served its purpose.
That's interesting. It really is. So I was thinking about mules and stuff like that as well, because
yes, well, that was another thing. There was blue asbestos there, tipped. And there was a chap. I think he had an unusual name. I think they called him Wastel Anderson. Wastel, and he'd been employed by Newalls, and he knew there was they called it the white heap, but amongst the white heap there was this blue asbestos, which is a really lethal stuff, and they had a decontamination setup where you went on site. I never actually went on site, but the lads that did it, the engineers that went down there, they had to sort of don space suits, and when they came out they had a shower, and there was a lot of incidents of asbestosis down there, people living in the area, but there was a brickworks down there, Blythes, and there was a quarry, a huge quarry, like a clay pit where they'd used excavated stuff to make the bricks. And I think they used that, well, they did use it to backfill a lot of this stuff, but it was all controlled. Lethal, terrible.
So when about did that white heap disappear? Because it wasn't immediately, was it?
It was down Cox Green.
Yeah.
There's a footbridge. There's a photograph somewhere I've seen where we've got the footbridge and you've got the white heap, literally white, behind it. But of course there was quite a few houses down there as well. People lived practically on the doorstep,
Yeah,
Terrible.
Yeah. And so when did that go?
They started very early on getting shot of that. I would think by the end of the 70s it would have gone. Tube Investments, that was another big setup. They moved further up. That was in Hartburn, which were called Hartburn. Yeah. And the highways, I was seconded up onto the highways. I still call it Kenny Martin's. The showrooms. Where it's just been taken over by Asda.
Yes.
On the well, we called it the Albany Link Road. It linked Spout Lane with the highway.
Oh yes.
But that was the first bit of road they put in, and they called it the Northwest Distributor Road. That was the name of it. And the underpass on that road, I reckon, was the first underpass in the new town. And it's still there, the underpass, just a little pedestrian thing. And that linked up, well, when they started building Washington Highway, they built this huge site cabin. And it was opposite, you've got what's now Asda, and then you've got, there used to be a car showroom, Kenny Martin's, but I think Greg's have got a unit there, and some other people. And immediately opposite there, there's shrubs and that now, there was this quite a sizable wooden hut, and I was up there for about a year. We basically doing, the quantity surveyors used to do the documents, and we would check them out, just number crunching really. And there was a chap called Bob Gardner. He was a chain smoker, Bob, and then put one out in it. And he always drank his tea clear cold. It was a quirk of his. He'd make his tea and it waited until it got really cold and then he drank it. He was as I say, a chain smoker, and he was well into his 80s when he died.
Made a stern stuff.
He lived at Oxford Avenue. Aye.
So was it mostly you know, when you went round these sites, was it really like the same kind of team of people that was doing all of it?
Well, I was on the engineering side. I wasn't much involved in the architect side. But putting the road structures in, the basic road networks and the drainage. I went on all the sites, and they were just, you know, literally green fields. I remember walking from, the pit was still operational then, Washington F pit, walking up across the fields up to Blackfell, and there had been an army camp up there. And I never saw the army camp, but the parade ground was still there, and that's where B&Q. There was a shop, a big place, I think they called it Dixon's.
Oh, yes.
And Dixon's was in the unit which had been occupied by a factory, RCA. They made records. And they got a new lease of life because they were doing, excuse me, they were doing Elvis Presley. You know, when Elvis died, there was a sudden surge in the records, and it gave them a bit of, because I think it was on its last legs, the RCA.
Well, the lad that used to come round here selling bread and that.
That's right.
He used to get records from there, and I
They were
said,
like-
"Son, get us an Elvis Presley one." And he said he used to buy a few because he was making Elvis.
Yeah.
My daughter took us
The
to
neighbours.
Sunderland to see the Newcastle to see the show that was on with it.
Oh,
And then
nice.
she took us to a workman's club in Sunderland, and you know that was equally as good as I said the old.
Yeah.
What a great night, didn't we? Well,
I'll tell you a few tales of Eddie. She was a widow, and her son was a merchant seaman, and he bought her this monkey, so she was stuck with it.
And am I right? He was the cleaner.
She was a caretaker,
Caretaker.
and she talked with it. She had a burr. She belonged to Ashington, you know. She had the Ashington twang, and I remember standing in the gents having a wee, and the door burst open. "Don't mind me, son. I'm just showing the man where the electric meter is."
would have been all the same if you had mine.
But she did. She called us her Bens, you know. And
She was lovely.
She would brew up things, but it got to the stage as the place developed. I mean, she was caretaker for the building, you know, Usworth Hall, the entity Usworth Hall. But once they started to expand, they had to get cleaners in, and it just got too much for her. So by that time she was a pensionable age anyway. But they looked after her. They made sure that she was they gave her a house in Glebe, so she ended her days in Glebe.
It's lovely.
But she was a character, very well liked.
Yeah.
Um,
And you know, she was calling you our Ben. So how old were you when you started work then?
22.
22.
And there was one or two. The lasses were about 20. Basically, how they did it was they appointed the chief officers. The chief officers appointed the PAs, and then the departments then began to expand. And initially, the infrastructure, the drainage, they concentrated on the stuff that was underground, really. And then before they ever put a brick on the surface, it was all had to be done in advance, and then they started to build. And as they started to build, then the architects department expanded. So it grew as the town grew, the staff grew, and I think at its peak, when you take into consideration the various offshoots that they had, depots and that, there's over 800 odd people worked there.
Wow.
It was a big setup, you know.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the reverse happened as things sort of wound down. And it ended up, there was just about a dozen of us and we moved out of Usworth Hall and we finished up with a little office block in Parsons Industrial Estate, and that's where we finished. So it was very sad. That thing I've shown you there, you can take that away. I've got it all down on that.
This is fantastic.
That's an interesting one. That's Manor Park. That was the old Manor Park farm, and that's it's all demolished now, and there's a sheltered housing on that site now.
Right. I'm trying to place where that is.
You've got Concord up here, you come round the bend, and then you go down, you've got the school on the left, you've got the highway, under the highway, and then you've got the school on the left, so that's on the bend as you go round.
Wow. So, I mean, you've seen massive changes in the layout of the whole town. I mean, it must have felt like you were just coming to a village.
The other thing was, I got membership of what was called the top club.
Oh, right.
At that time, the pits were still active. You know, there was Usworth Colliery, Washington F, and Glebe. So it was still quite a thriving mining community. And I remember going to they called it the Blue Room. It was on the landing, and all the old miners with their pipes, you know. And they drank gills. They didn't drink pints. It was gills or half glasses. Mind they could knock them back, but they never had the pint glasses. Or always the halves. And oh, son, where do you work? Development Corporation. Because they blamed Holly for the pit closures. You see. He was Satan. But again, I've explained in that thing I've given you. When I worked at the NCB, I was privy to a meeting, a meeting in camera. It was at the Royal Station Hotel, and a chap called Alf Robins, who was the chairman of the coal board.
He was the guy with the cloth cap, wasn't he?
No. That's another story. That was Lord Hailsham.
Oh, Lord Hailsham, that's right, yes.
Quinton Hogg. His proper name was Quinton Hogg, but he's Lord Hailsham. I'll tell you a tale about that as well. But Alfie Robins, as he was called, he met with the group leaders of the pits, and he spelled it out. He said, the coal industry is shrinking, and the only surviving pits in a Durham and Northumberland coalfield are going to be the ones on the coast. All the others are gone. And that would be, I would think, about 1961, 62, when he said that. And of course it happened. All the pits in the Durham coalfield started to close. But because it coincided with with new town development, they blamed Stephen Holly. He was the figurehead. The pits were closed because of Hollywood. That was totally untrue. But you're on about Lord Hailsham. I worked, as I said, I worked at the coal board, and he came. Strange enough, he announced, because he was sort of Minister for the North or something. He had some sort of fancy title, and he came to open Delarue's factory at Team Valley, and it was a windy day, and we were all watching this. The limos pulling up. The limos were pulling up, and it was a windy day, and he had a cloth cap on. It's like a prop, you know. And it blew off. His hat blew off, and some flunky ran across the road. I can see it now. Ran across the road to pick his cap up.
Because your average bloke with a cap would be able to do that.
That was when they announced, when he was up there. I'm sure that was the same time that they announced that they were going to create a new town, which basically was northern boundary would be Follingsby, southern boundary the Weir, westward the A1, and eastward the railway line, which was then operational.
Right.
And that was the area contained. And then later on, the designated area was extended to include what's now Patterson industrial estate, which is a little
beyond
bit towards
the
Sunderland.
Yeah.
They added that, it's like a bulge at the bottom, and they added that bit to it.
Interesting. So, when did that bit come in? Was that sort of the 80s or?
No, it was earlier than that.
Uh-huh.
It'd be in the 70s.
Uh-huh.
And we had the other strange thing was there's a film they made a film actually, like a spoof film with the staff themselves in it.
Oh.
And when we were planning the new town, the centre, they weren't sure where they were going to locate the town centre.
Mhm.
And in the spoof, they've got these flags and it's like sticking pins in, you know. And as it happened, the town centre is in the centre of the town.
Yeah.
Ironically, it's in the centre of the town, but at the time they weren't sure exactly where they were going to locate it.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aye.
So, do you know what happened to that film?
I've got a copy of it there. But it's quite funny. There's a chap called Brian Walker. He was the producer, if you like, the director and producer. He was a character, Brian. And
so, what did Brian do? Was he part of the development?
he was
corporation?
he's an architect.
Mhm.
Yeah. We had quantity surveyors, planners. There's a chap called Jack Harrison who was a forestry officer, and the Usworth Hall had a wall garden, which has been when the house was built. Incidentally, the house was built, it was either 1805 or 1815. I remember looking it up, and it coincided with either the year of the Battle of Trafalgar or Waterloo, was either the two. And the chap that had the house built was a fella called Captain, he was an army captain, Rowe, R-O-W-E. And he built that house with the dowry he got, Georgian house.
I'm just wondering about, when you're talking about the people that you worked with, was it a very male environment at the time, or? It was predominantly male, in that you had architects and engineers who were, they were, but you had we had a typing pool, we had the P's who I've already mentioned, and they had tracers. Ah, yes.
In the drone offices, and they were all girls. There was Nora Muffling stands out. She was an elderly woman, and she had lived up on Usworth, High Usworth, and her husband was rather eccentric. George, they called her husband, and they reckoned the house was haunted. So swore the house was haunted, and she's on the film as well, Nora Muffling.
Because we've shared a few of the Development Corporation's official films, the ones that got made by Turners.
Aye.
They're obviously advertising the town.
Yes.
Interesting to see the other side.
Aye. The last time I saw that film was down the Arts Centre. They did a presentation. That was before lockdown.
What was the daft thing you were doing when you were in Concord with a drum? You've got that.
Well, that was the film I'm on about.
Yeah.
Nuts.
That's fascinating.
That's some good nights so for the kids, bonfire nights, and that was great, wasn't it?
So about with the bonfire nights?
They had, where Rio Vac factory is now. That was just a field, and had a bonfire on there. I tell you, one year they had a barbecue thing, and it had a firework display, and had this flat flatbed wagon that had the fireworks in this container, and somehow or other the whole lot went around. Rockets and things. It was pandemonium.
Oh God.
But they were great. They put the bales of straw in the courtyard, and they had there was a lad called David Sproat, and he had he was in a band called the Junko Partners.
Oh yes.
And they played, and we had a trad band, a trad jazz band as well.
Kids loved it, didn't they?
Yeah, great. happy days. They were really a very friendly place to work.
And that's lovely. I mean, because, you know, when you were talking about getting interviewed and everybody having to refer to all the managers as Mr., you sort of go, well, was it really strict?
Oh yes,
or?
yes. Well, Mr. Yeah.
What might have been better with hindsight? Is there anything that you think would have been?
But, I think they dropped the clanger. It was a very controversial thing.
Mm-hmm.
When they were establishing the highways, they worked on this. It was American sort of system of districts.
Yeah.
So you were signed. Signs had district this, district that. It's like a forerunner of the postcode, really. But you see, the problem they had, and they actually thought about doing this. The interchanges, they thought of putting some sort of symbol like fruit, like a pineapple, or an apple, or an orange. So when you were directing somebody, you'd say, well, when you get to the pineapple, because there's no landmarks. You see, in the new town, there's no traditional landmarks. It's all new. So you've got no database, you've got no sort of datum to work to. And each interchange looks exactly the same as the other. You're travelling, especially when it was first built, because there was no feature. It was featureless. There was no trees or anything. It was just highway. So the thought of doing something like that, it never came off. But they did go ahead with this district thing, and I remember Mr. G, Ken G, he actually made television with it because it was such a controversial thing, and he was explaining what, and it was a hopeless argument because nobody really wanted it, you know. So in terms of what was a mistake made, I think that was a mistake. But Jack Harrison, the landscape man, forestry officer, he worked on the Norfolk convoys during the war, and he used to tell me, he said, absolutely crackers really. He said, I used to made a point of getting a cold shower every morning. He said, and that would sort of brace us, but he said, if you fell into the sea up there, he says, you were dead within minutes. You know, that was so intensely cold, but it was like a morale booster. He was a lovely man, Jack Harrison. And they brought trees on. A lot of the trees and shrubs that they've seen in town were actually grown, started off in Usworth Hall. They used the wall garden to bring them on, and then they had what they called a mist propagation unit, and they brought young trees in a strange sort of a greenhouse, but they were always very humid. And as the name suggests, misty, you know, sort of very moist. And they used to bring the young saplings on, and then they would plant them out.
Brilliant.
And often when I'm travelling down the highway and I see all these trees, I think of Jack Harrison, because he never lived to see it. You know what I mean? He knew there would be mature trees before he'd long gone.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, like, probably I've grown up sort of always knowing that Washington's got a bit of greenery around it. When would you say that actually started to be noticeable, like, rather than being like this sort of like, you know, basically just
barren,
yeah?
Well, I think by the 80s things were starting to, establish themselves. Do you know that when they built the highways, they made tunnels for hedgehogs and things, so they could go underneath the embankments.
That's forward thinking. Was that in the 60s they did that?
Well, it was the highways. They built it in stages. The first section would be from what was called Havana Terrace, which is I could keep going back to this Kenny Martin's place, which is now where Armstrong Industrial Estate is. That interchange there, Parsons, round that way. That section from down to what's now the town centre, and they added another bit. I remember the bridge at Chater's Hoff, the bridge that crosses the weir. The approach to that which were going over the roadway, which we've got Harrington, that up the bank, Vigo Lane around that way, and the highway goes on. Walking, go to a site meeting there, and a chap called Jeff Hallett was the site. He was the site engineer, and we had Wellingtons on, and the mud was up the, you know, you was really struggling to walk in the mud. Yeah.
And my son-in-law was one of the top gardeners for Washington Council. Retired, didn't he, Norman? He used to do all the flower displays, and what he doesn't know about gardening is not worth knowing.
That was another controversial thing. That when they closed Spout Lane to through traffic, that really hue and cry about that. But the idea was, and it's worked, I mean, was to make the village, isolate the village from through traffic. But that didn't go down well at all.
I can imagine. Because you do have to go around the houses to get the Concord, don't you?
Yeah. And then the pit road ends, what they call the pit road ends, where it goes past the F pit. I mean, that road's quite a busy road. Because the bus route was from the bus station and down Spout Lane, down Fatfield, across the River Wear, and then up the other side.
Yeah, when we first come here, I thought I'd come down to the earth after living near centre of Newcastle. I hated it at first. I used to go on the bus every weekend to be with this.
I mean, as I said,
what did you miss?
It was New Washington. You could go down there. You had electricity showrooms, gas showrooms, banks, grocers' shops, butchers.
There was that shop where we got my first Hoover.
Yeah.
Down there.
A Co-op, a Walter Wilson's.
And it was a silly demo when it wouldn't pick up, we took it back when he changed it.
You could do all your shopping there. And then, of course, when they built the town centre, when that developed, I mean, it created a vacuum because the electricity board, as it was then called, North Eastern Electricity Board, they moved into the town centre.
Barclays Bank
Gas
was there.
moved.
Trustees Bank was there.
The banks moved down to the town centre. So all you've got in Concord now is takeaways.
Yeah.
Well, you've got Herons and the Co-op.
Yes, that's about the only two.
And that
I was just reading this the other night.
Fantastic. Oh, these
The interim plan exhibition, that was the day of my interview. That's why I know the date exactly, because it was the same.
Yes.
That is the proceedings.
You know, you were saying about missing the West End of Newcastle. Was it the social life you were missing, or the shops, or the nightlife, or?
There wasn't much nightlife, was there? I think it was being so near the town, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
You could just get one bus into town,
Yeah.
couldn't you?
Right. Yeah.
I remember they once took us in the Burgoyne's pub that used to be there, and they wouldn't serve him. They said he's underage. I went, he's not. I'm engaged from there's his date of birth.
Yeah.
They weren't going to serve you, were they?
It's always nice, though,
It's
isn't
all
it?
changed the town now, though, isn't it? As well.
Yeah.
My mother was a great shopper at the Co-op for the dividends.
Yeah.
These were all sort of wind up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was sad. It was an awful feeling when the end came, you know, because it had been such a happy time, you know.
Yeah, it must have been. Yeah.
These are. I don't know if you can glean anything from.
Yeah. Did they feel the work was done, or do you think it was just like a money-saving thing in the end?
Well, I think the original concept of the new town was that after 60 years the investment would be repaid over a period of 60 years. But the government of the day seemed impatient to get some yield from the thing before maturity. So, I mean, from my point of view, as a personal view, I think they were premature in winding the corporation down. There was a lot of infrastructure put in, which came to the benefit of the private developer,
Aye.
you know. They weren't building on greenfield sites, so all the services were already in for them to tap into.
Mm. Yeah.
And of course the taxpayer didn't get the benefit of that.
Yeah. Well, everything got sold off in the 80s.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't like to start again in this house the way it was when we got it.
Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah.
an interesting thing. You
Uh-huh.
mentioned Jed Parker, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, Jed was the chairman of our branch,
Uh-huh.
Nalgo,
Uh-huh.
which was a union. And that's the
Yeah.
letter he sent
Oh.
to the board. Well,
Yeah.
we got a love cup,
Mm-hmm.
an engraved love cup. That's what we got, which I think I've got in the loft.
Yeah.
But what happened was, when the Commission for the New Towns took over,
Mm-hmm.
or rather just prior to that, the emphasis of the corporation was job generation,
Mm.
creating jobs, and you had the Nissan thing coming along. And again, you can argue and say, well, they fall into the same trap as they had previously, because
Mm.
the area was totally dependent on one industry, and that was coal.
Yeah.
And once
Well,
the
there
coal
was-
industry
there was
was
that,
disastrous,
there was
and
Timex.
if Nissan ever pulled out of here, they would
Oh,
have a
yeah.
similar situation.
There was
Oh, you're
Timex,
exiting
wasn't it,
the
that Margaret Isler worked at? Timex down the
Yeah.
road.
Yeah.
They came in sort of probably when did they come in when the mines were shutting though?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of industry came into light into engineering, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of commercial businesses came in. So it did the job in terms of job generation. But I mean, Nissan was the icing on the cake. But again, it's relying on one industry.
Mm.
And I remember they had the top man from Nissan came to Osworth Hall, and he looked and he could speak fairly good English. He said, "I know what you're thinking." He says, "Well, you look all the same to us." They used to have sushi. Is that sushi? You know, the raw fish thing.
Oh yeah.
When the Japanese blokes were at the hall, because we had quite a few of them,
Uh-huh.
came. There was a van used to come selling sushi.
So where did they get that from?
I don't know.
In the
I don't
80s?
know, but they were very resourceful.
Yeah.
And you'd open a door, you know.
Mm-hmm.
You'd open the door, and hi.
Yeah.
You had impeccable manners, you know.
Yeah.
Hi.
That must have been amazing. I mean, did you feel like you were treading on eggshells in case the sort of like took flight and ran at sort of some perceived slight? Or
No, I think by and large they got on all right. They didn't seem to socialise in terms of if we had a social to do. They didn't sort of mingle in that respect, but they were fine, you know. Just all young blokes.
uh-huh.
You know, there wasn't.
Remember when you were at the coal board and we went to that big dance, and I was pregnant with Deborah, and the head one got us
Oh,
up to
Dr.
dance.
Reid.
And
You
I
wanted some
would have
pillowcases.
set the pillowcases and I've still got them.
Aye, Dr. Reid.
Dr. Reid, aye.
Where was that dance?
Scotsman. That was at the Mayfair.
Mayfair.
Which is long gone.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Yeah.
This
The
is
band
brilliant.
used to be on like a swivel thing, didn't it?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Used to come round.
Yeah.
That was still operational when we moved here. That's the brickworks in Usworth.
right. Wow.
And that's Usworth Pit.
All right. Yes. Yeah. See, if I'd seen that in the library, I'd have thought that was F Pit because it's very much the same
similar,
style,
yeah,
isn't it?
yes.
Yeah.
And this stack on the film I'm on about, it shows you them demolishing that.
Wow. That's. So how long was the brickworks there?
It was winding down when we moved in. I mean, that was taken in '66, which is the year we were married, which is the year we moved into this house. And you can see it's still, you know, still workmen there. It was still operational, but it didn't survive long after that. It was on the way out. It's a crest as a development corporation. The motto is, I think, bound together by a common device or something, and it's a Washington coat of arms superimposed on the cross of Durham.